Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Racer Decides. This is episode 13 for the 2024 Northern Territory election. Did you forget about it? Because we almost did.
Yep,
How are you, Nolsey? How was the City to
the
Surf?
run. Yeah, just to let you know, if you run to City of the South, you're running with literally Hitler. My legs feel like they're gonna fall off. But I did beat the women's professional team, so don't train,
Oh, yeah,
don't do anything, still beat the women's professional team.
yeah, anyone could. Anyone could. I don't know how you do those things, man. My legs give way after bugger all. I can't do cardio. I hate it.
It's
I like
because you're
lifting,
built
but I
like a
hate fucking
brick.
cardio. Huh?
You're built like a brick.
Not exactly. I'm good at lifting weights because I've done that for years, but just hate like other forms of exercise, like running.
Mm,
Uh, anyway, you guys didn't tune in to hear us talk about workout routines or anything, so
nah.
we'll get into this. And well, look, perhaps why you did or didn't hear about the election is because, well, it's not even a state, it's a territory. Their population is about 233,000, which is about half that even of Tasmania. So, certainly,
Yeah.
they're a small area of our country, even though geographically, of course, it's a very big part. But yeah, population wise, quite low. And also, even though Darwin is, big in comparison to other cities in the Northern Territory, they still have a very widely dispersed population.
Yeah,
Um,
it's very low
and
density.
yeah, real low density. And well, uh, did you know approximately 30.8% Aboriginal as well?
Wow.
So
I'm actually
that
surprised
is
it's not more really.
Yeah, I mean, given the amount of coverage of various Indigenous issues, mainly crime, of course, you could be forgiven for thinking that, it was up around 50% or so. Um, should point out, of course, that 30.8% does make up mixed blood Aborigines as well. However, there is still a shitload of full bloods in the Northern Territory. Not so much
It's
in
where you find
Darwin,
them.
but once you go bush, pretty much every Aboriginal is full blooded over there.
Well,
They've got
basically, yeah,
yeah,
Darwin. Yeah, Darwin is basically just like a military base and then an open air adult daycare center for Aboriginals.
to a large extent. And look,
Yeah,
I don't have any doubt. Well, what am I doing? I should be giving you results, shouldn't I? So
yeah.
I'm just going to go to um, the ABC News website. I'm going to F5 on this. So okay, at the time of recording, we've got 57.6% of the vote counted. The Country Liberal Party, well, look, if you don't know yet, they've won. Okay, in fact, this is pretty much what you would call a landslide victory.
Yeah.
So far, they have got 49.2% of the vote. They have experienced a whopping 17.9% swing in their favour. And in the 25 seat lower house, they have won 16 altogether. You know how many seats they had in 2020?
Wasn't it two?
Six.
Oh, six. Sorry,
Six.
yeah.
Oh, 2016 is when they had two.
That's what I was
So,
thinking about. Yeah, they're almost
yeah.
gone. Like literally, they were almost like a non-party.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, it's very interesting actually. Back in 2016, uh, yeah, so there was two seats. One of them was Leah Finocchiaro, and she's of course going to be the new chief minister. Uh, well, it was her and Higgins. God, I'm sorry, I forget his name. Um, Geez, I should have. Hold on, let me just quickly F5 this. I'm really sorry. I thought I would have had that one memorized. Gary Higgins, I'm sorry. So, Gary Higgins' seat was actually so close that it took a few days for them to announce the winner there. So,
Hmm.
not only was it only two seats, but one of them they nearly lost. So it was quite pitiful. And it looked for a while that they wouldn't even be declared the official opposition in the territory. There were a number of independents who outnumbered them, and there was talk for a while of them forming some kind of alliance to make an informal party. That was voted down, however. But then later on, in 2020, just before the next election, there was this party that was registered called the Northern Territory Alliance. And this was a very unusual party in that it was there to promote regionalism, regional Australia, obviously. But it was a big tent party ideologically. And it was just full of people like who used to be in the CLP or used to be in Labor. And they said that they rejected the traditional left-right dichotomy of politics and, yeah, want to do this really weird big tent platform.
Naspolism?
Well, look, I mean, initially they did okay. I think they had upwards of about 4 members in Parliament or something. Not really because of electoral victory, but because you had people, independents joining them or people from other parties joining them. And they also were tried to become the official opposition of the Northern Territory at that point in time as well. That, again, was voted down, and they no longer exist anymore. So you're right back to your usual Labor versus Liberal, or Territory Labor versus Country Liberals, as they like to say in that area. Okay, let me get back to the results. So, yeah, Country Liberal Party is currently on 16 seats. They only needed 13 to win, and that is a gain of 10 seats compared to 2020. Labor, their total vote so far is 28.6%. They have suffered a 10.8% swing against them. They are currently sitting on 4 seats, and that means they have lost 8. So that's definitely what you call a landslide against them. Okay, the Greens are on 8%. That was a 3.6% swing in their favour. It's still, we do not have any seats though, but the ABC is projecting the seat of Fanny Bay to go to the Greens. I believe this is like one of the more inner city seats, about as inner city as you can get for Darwin. And the ABC were putting this down to, well, a failure of Labor to cut through on some environmental issues. Like, they're friendly towards fracking and stuff like that. And yes, unfortunately, even the Greens of the Northern Territory have a bit of a following over there. So, yeah, they could well take that seat of Fanny Bay that was previously held by Labor. The Territory Alliance...
It still shocks me that you fucking find, Greens out in the middle of buttfuck nowhere.
Yeah.
I understand NIMBY, but, like, that's for its own fucking reasons, though. Nimbin, sorry.
Yeah, well, yeah, because of all the fucking weed.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, oh God, for some reason the ABC have included the Territory Alliance in this. They're not registered anymore, so obviously everything comes up as 0 there. And we've got 3 independents who have won seats, or at least are projected to have won seats. So I'll just go through the 3 independents. We've got Robin Lambley. She actually resigned from the Country Liberal Party back in 2015. And she then contested her seat of Araluen as an independent in 2016. She won that. She's actually the former deputy of the CLP and treasurer as well. And then in 2020, she was one of those independents I mentioned who jumped over to the Territory Alliance. Of course, Territory Alliance having not being re-registered. Lost all of those members, and again, she just simply sat this election as an independent and won.
Yeah.
Um, oh god. So you reckon this might be an Indigenous candidate? Yingiya Mark Gulua. Anyway, this is he's the member for Mulka in northeast Arnhem Land, which, as you can imagine, is a heavily uh, Aboriginal populated area.
Yeah, I
So,
imagine the independent Golua is going to beat out fucking your man Allen there.
yeah, well, look, I think he did take that from a Labor candidate back in the day. Um, by the way, it's funny. Labor actually, like the Northern Territory, is really the only place where Labor take regional seats. That and the seat of what is it, Joel Fitzgibbon's old seat. I forget what it is, but the reason why Labor pick up these regional seats or bush seats, as they're mainly called, is because there's just a lot of Aborigines there.
Yeah,
Whereas in other regional areas of Australia, it tends to be farming and farming communities who
yeah.
make up the votes. So
They're
and they
out in the
will vote
bush fucking
for national.
drinking. It's just like it's a function of like, are you out in the bush drinking and pissing yourself up every single day? You're out in the bush like actually farming and rotating crop and livestock.
Right. So, yeah, you can imagine that in these bush areas, there's not exactly a lot of agriculture going on there,
No.
despite the fact they apparently were agriculturalists, according to Bruce Pascoe. But no, not really any of that happens, and yeah, they tend to be the ones that vote Labor. And so far, it doesn't look like Labor have picked up any seats in Darwin at all. They're really just relying on these Aboriginal bush votes. At least at the moment, they are anyway. So anyway, this independent candidate, Yingoa, uh, he is very much he campaigns on an Aboriginal platform. So, like it's on self determination for Aboriginal people in the territory. He wants a treaty between Aborigines and non-Aborigines. Um, he says that he would prefer that over Indigenous recognition in the Constitution. So you could say that maybe he was one of those progressive no voters. I'm not sure if he actually voted
Mm,
no or whatever, but he definitely was one of those people who said the Indigenous voice is too soft. We need to go further. We need a treaty, and that means we need reparations. We need compensation. We need money from the white fella to make up for all the past wrongs. Um, Now, look, some of the other things that he does, I don't actually have a problem with. Like, he's very much into teaching Aboriginal language to people out in their remote schools and things like that. I don't have a problem with
Aboriginal
that.
language, something I just pulled out of my ass 30 minutes ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. It can't be that hard to teach, can it? Well, it's to consider it a bunch of fucking clicks and utters, and it's not
You have to
even
be very
like
specific
people
about
like
pronunciation. There's please sir, I'm simply looking to go home to my loving family, and a handful of clicks extra, and that's please sir, I need to dick down my prepubescent cousin.
right. Yeah. So he actually did like he's done speeches in the parliament in his traditional language before, like with an interpreter present. Apparently, he was the first person to ever do that in the Northern Territory Parliament. But yeah, it looks like he's been re-elected. Okay, and finally, for the independents, we've got Justine Davis. She is the first ever teal to be elected to the Northern Territory Parliament. So, she was only an independent in name only. For all intents and purposes, she is part of a party structure that is funded by Climate 200 and Simon Holmes à Court. Nonetheless, she's still there on paper as a teal. She even launched her campaign with David Pocock, who is the only teal in the federal Senate. So I don't think I need to go through the usual, policy platform there. Think of all those green liberal policies that you've grown accustomed to from the likes of Zoe Daniel and everyone else, all the other teals in federal parliament. And yeah, that's what Justine Davis represents. Okay, so yeah, just to give you a bit of a history on this, we already gave you a little bit, but um, the Country Liberal Party, they were last in power under Adam Giles, I believe. And then before that, it was, what was his name?
Fuck.
Terry Mills.
That's a little of a shit. We had to pause the show to go find out what the fuck that was. That's how little people give a shit about this entire territory.
Well, sorry about that. I read all of this before. My thoughts are just very scattered on it. But yeah, it was Terry Mills. So he actually only headed the party for a very short period of time. There was, I think, what was it, 167 days all up, which at the time was a record for the shortest stay. That record's since been broken, though. So, yeah, he was taken out. There were actually a number of leadership challenges against him before the successful one by Adam Giles, who was the transport minister at the time. Adam Giles is actually an authentic, like, quadroon, I think, and you can actually see it in. It's like he didn't have to sleep in a sunbed like Lydia Thorpe to make it believable.
He's got the big, natural, fat, fucking air-sucking nose, those flared-out nostrils. Yeah, I love how, like, look at if you look at his Wikipedia page, I love how, like, Anglo-Saxon starts becoming like a real taxological category. When as soon as someone fucked an Aboriginal, it's like his mother was Anglo-Saxon. And his father was from where is it said here? Karamagori people through Giles' grandmother.
Okay, so yeah, Terry Mills won at the 2012 general election. Like I said, very quickly ousted by Adam Giles. Adam Giles, of course, then went and lost in the 2020 election. That's the one we mentioned where the CLP was reduced to only 2 seats. And as I said, even their status as opposition was questioned. It was actually questioned twice during that electoral cycle. And it was during that time that Adam Giles had a brief stint on Sky News. And he actually infamously interviewed Blair Cottrell on Sky News, which proved to be very controversial. Unusual given that Blair Cottrell had already appeared on the ABC and on SBS. And in the case of the SBS one, he was there actually like debating proponents of multiculturalism and actually owning them, basically. So, I would have thought, if anything, SBS should have been the ones, more condemned for what they did, because Blair Cottrell ended up looking better on that station.
Yeah,
in my view, anyway.
In everyone's fucking view, man. There's no way you can slice it where that fucking, was it professor, whatever the fuck his name of, doesn't come off as literally like a snarly, seething little genocidal maniac.
Yeah, I think, you're referring to that part there where Cottrell said, well, is multiculturalism a destination or is it a journey?
Got him.
Yeah, and it's like, where does it end? Where do you actually get to? And, they all have to admit, no, it's a journey, isn't it? You never actually reach it. So yeah, at that time, they actually banned Sky News in train stations in Victoria. The relevant minister back then was Jacinta. Um, oh Jesus, Jacinta
Fuck.
Allen. Is that another mind?
There
Now
we
I can't
go.
even remember the Victorian fucking premier's name. Uh, yeah,
On this
she banned
episode of
Sky News.
Finian suffers through his dementia diagnoses.
Yeah, you know what it is? I'm not drinking beer. I'm drinking coffee because, like, we're
Oh
doing this in
no.
the early afternoon. I'm used to, the
It's
fluids.
a Sunday. You're meant to start early.
Yeah, I'm used to the fluids lubricating me. But yeah, that was just crazy at the time, like just how controversial that was. Just because, and I mean, Adam Giles challenged Cottrell, as you can imagine. It was a pretty typical, like, kind of, uh, maybe not hardball interview, but still tough.
Yeah.
And it, yeah, and then ever since then, of course, I've heard Cottrell say that he just never got another invitation to another, like mainstream media outlet because of that. So
But
yeah,
he
that's
fucking
just always
trounced
how
him.
I
That's
remember
why.
Adam Giles. Like
You,
it's
you
like
can
I
always you can always just trust Blair to make like a simple ideological package that you can pick up and like is pretty fucking because it's all self-contained, very very sturdy and resistant to attacks,
right.
rhetorical attacks. Yeah, so you can always trust him to do that, which means he's an anathema to any kind of modern mainstream media production about him.
Mm. Right. So yeah, when we had that election then in 2016, two seats in the parliament there, one for Leah Finocchiaro and one for Gary Higgins. So Gary Higgins became the leader at that point. They had to split the shadow portfolios in two. So they both just had an enormous amount to take on. So, for example, Finocchiaro was Shadow Minister for Justice and Attorney General, Shadow Minister for Police, Fire and Emergency Services, Health, Children, Territory Families, Education, Trade and Essential Services, and Opposition Whip. That is, yeah, quite a workload to take on. So,
Mm.
Gary Higgins resigned after not too long. Finocchiaro led the CLP into the 2020 election. That was where they went from two seats to six. So Labor was still in by a fairly comfortable majority at that end. And now here she is, ascendant, with 16 seats, beating Labor in a landslide. So, should we talk about the bleeding obvious in terms of what was it that went on in the Northern Territory that caused their constituents to reject Labor in such a resounding fashion? Well, I don't think there's any doubt it's the C word here, that being crime.
Mm.
Or, as I saw the ABC refer to it as in one of the articles I read, was a failure of Labor to control social issues. That's what they call them,
Wow.
social issues.
That is a
Uh,
really neat way to step around the fucking big issue.
yeah. Now, look, to be fair, they did. I mean, like one of the articles I've got here is actually completely about crime in the Northern Territory. But yeah, the fact that they refer to it as that, that's actually the kind of language that Amnesty International have been using. They've actually got like ratings of candidates in terms of their human rights policies. What are their records on human rights and how they measure that? Because remember, Amnesty International, they're supposed to be about things like uh, detaining people because of political speech or torturing people and that kind of stuff, violation of human rights in various ways. So the way they focus on it in the Northern Territory context is basically all about crime and how prisoners are treated, not about how they control crime, but about things like age of criminal responsibility, that kind of thing. And what a surprise, Amnesty want to raise the level of criminal responsibility to 14 in the Northern Territory. Now, you just imagine
Mm.
that. I mean, they're about to raise it to 12 in Victoria, but in a territory where you're talking about 30.8% of the population being Aboriginal and 12, 13-year-olds, 11-year-olds,
Jacking
would
cars.
it would be impossible for them to actually commit a crime and therefore actually, receive charges or anything, and which basically makes the police powerless to do anything about them. Certainly can't lock them up. But yeah, that's what Amnesty International think is a good idea.
And
Um,
remind everyone that people aren't just these kids just aren't just like doing, oh, I'm doing a little bit of like petty shoplifting. No, these kids are checking cars and raping people.
right. I mean, look, let's take the latest snap lockdown, or snap curfew, as they referred to it in Alice Springs. This was about, I don't know, a month or two ago. Four off-duty police officers were assaulted by a gang of Aborigines. Someone was stabbed outside a bottle shop, and an on-duty police officer was run over by a car. That all happened in one day, okay, in Alice Springs. So then, of course, a snap curfew was called, and still the Aboriginal activist groups came out and said that this was an overreaction to just, some isolated incidents. Really? Yeah. So, I mean, it was crime of that nature, not fucking just shoplifting or something, but, violent stabbings and everything that were going on. Remember Declan's Law? Declan was the name of a 19-year-old kid who was working in a Dan Murphy's and was stabbed to death by someone trying to rob the store. Um, that led the Country Liberal Party to take up the mantle of Declan's Law, which was about making bail conditions harsher because the subhuman who stabbed that kid was out on bail.
Yep.
So, it's very much like, in Queensland, where you had all of these people out on bail and they did not give a shit about breaking their conditions, and in fact went on to perform very serious crimes that finally let Queensland Labor go back to their old bail laws. They need to go a lot further than that, but anyway, it's a start. Now, in the Northern Territory, however, Territory Labor didn't. They basically maintained the status quo. Um, Now, putting this in context, federally. Now, of course, because of the fact that they're a territory, the Commonwealth has more input, more say over the running and funding of the institutions in the Northern Territory. And of course, you need to point out that the scrapping of the cashless welfare card and the abolition of many dry areas, that is, alcohol free areas in the Northern Territory, were actually under the remit of the Commonwealth government, not of the Territory government.
Yeah.
Uh, However, Labor knew well in advance that the cashless welfare card was going to be scrapped, and that all of these dry areas were, soon to have alcohol um, allowed again. They knew all of this, and they didn't put into place any contingency plans at all, really. And, it was almost overnight that we started seeing all those TikTok videos and everything just pouring out because
Just
all of a
horrendous
sudden,
crimes being committed as like a social media trend. I know we've hopped on this a whole bunch, but it needs to be stated clearly what was happening there.
right. And that is where things just got absolutely out of control. So, you had a return to people using their dole money to pretty much exclusively buy alcohol and, petrol and smokes
Oh,
and
worse
whatnot.
shit.
Yeah, or gambling as well. Like makeshift gambling became a really big thing during COVID because, you got
That
W
was just
points.
weird to see.
got W Godol in COVID, or a lot of people did anyway. And yeah, they were able to use that money for things like illegal gambling. Um, whereas, white people who were on it, they did things like pay off their credit card debt. You know, so it's like, sometimes these payments can be a good thing. It just depends in whose pockets they actually go. Um, and the territory government still had the power to step in and make those formerly dry areas dry again. How do we know this? Well, because when the 2007 intervention finally came to an end, that was where you actually had the military come into the Northern Territory and enforce dry zones for a while.
I love how spastic it got overnight. That was fucking hilarious.
Yeah, it was a big deal. And I mean, it must have looked scary for a lot of them to see all of these army guys in military fatigues and everything. I mean, it would literally look like you're under invasion. Um, but anyway, that's where those dry areas started. Of course, towards the end of 2023, they were closed down. And this was proving to be a real headache for the federal government because their elbow was trying to tell us that we needed to vote for an Indigenous voice to Parliament. While at the same time, this voice that would be representing particular people, those particular people were absolutely out of control, running amok, committing all sorts of heinous crimes. And of course, the area where we saw this the most was Alice Springs. Now, Alice Springs
Yep.
was never a dry area. However, it surrounds a lot of them. Like once you go outside of Alice Springs, there's all these Aboriginal communities. And, typically, they would have to come into Alice Springs to get their alcohol. So, remember Albo did his little like overnight stay over there?
Mm.
He took an impromptu flight to Darwin where he
Trying to
met
look like
with
I'm doing
then,
something.
it was the then Chief Minister Natasha Files. Natasha Files took over from Michael Gunner, I should point out. So he was the Chief Minister who was under the Labor Chief Minister for actually quite a while, for like a term and a half. They went then to Natasha Files. She actually had to resign, believe it or not because of Aboriginal crime going out of control, but some shares that she had in her portfolio that weren't declared. And the only reason why they weren't declared is because she actually acquired them while she was in Parliament. Because I forget the details, but it was like one mining company basically taking over another. And because of that takeover or that merger or whatever it was, she just acquired shares automatically as a result. So it really was not a scandalous thing. Nonetheless, still, she resigned as a result. And then Eva Lawler became chief minister. So she's obviously been voted out as chief minister, but you know what? She lost her seat as well, which obviously was considered to be a safe Labor seat. So yeah, it just goes to show you how much of a resounding win this was for the Country Liberal Party. But anyway, Albo flew over, spoke to Natasha Files, and said, "Look, we've got a referendum coming up. The last thing we need is Aborigines, who this referendum is supposed to be for the benefit of, running out of control, drunk off their heads, stealing cars, torching them, and filming it all and posting
Living
it on
their
TikTok."
best lives.
And it was the day after he arrived, that Natasha Files said, "Okay, we're going to do it." So, with the assistance of the Commonwealth, of course, but still, it was the Northern Territory Parliament that moved to make all of these formerly dry areas again and banning alcohol. And guess what? You did actually see a reduction in crime. Not enough, certainly not enough, because if there was, you wouldn't have seen such a backlash against Labor in the results that we're looking at right now. But it made a small dent, very, very small. So yeah, it's pretty obvious that this was the hot button issue. You had all sorts of things going on. Like I was reading a guy about a guy profiled on the ABC. I'll just see if I can find it. So this guy, he said that in his business in Alice Springs was broken into more than 12 times in 18 months. Then eventually, in December of last year, his work vehicle was stolen, and they later found it out on fire, burnt to the ground. So, it, kind of typical of these patterns of carjacking. Like they're just interested in hooning them around for like one night and then just setting them on fire. It's like, what the
Yep.
fuck is the point of that? Like, why? Why do you do that?
It,
You think, like, if you're going to
fuck
steal a
you.
car, you'd at least like want to keep it or sell it or something. I mean, because you don't even really
Like
get any
literally take it
benefit
to a
from
chop shop, like a
it. Yeah.
stock standard criminal. No, guess not.
Yeah, but they don't do that. They just go out, ride them around for a while, and then destroy them. So he said for him, that was the last straw. He said that crime had cost him over $200,000. And he said that that was the cost of living in Alice Springs. So it was obviously too high for him. He packed up and he left. And there's just all sorts of stories like that. You just don't hear like that magnitude, that scale of crime happening anywhere else in this country, except for the northwest of WA. Really, that's it. Where you've got the same demographic of people, let's say. So, what is it though that the CLP are promising here? For a while, it was basically just Me Tooism. Labor tried to somewhat do damage control on this issue by announcing extra funding. So Eva Lawler, when she did her very first press conference for the campaign for the NT election, she actually did it outside of Palmerston Police Station. Very symbolic thing to go and do. And she announced, I believe it was $270 million of extra funding for the police. She also later on went to announce, I think it was around $130 million for domestic violence issues. Don't think I need to tell you, Northern Territory has the highest rates of domestic violence in the country by far. And you can take a guess as to who's causing it there. All right, so what I'm going to do now is switch over to the ABC's
Winners and
policy
losers
tracker.
panel. Yeah.
Hmm?
Oh, is it the winners and losers panel we're looking at?
Yes. So the ABC kind of go through the various issues and what the parties are promising on them. So I'm going to go to that now, and I'm going to skip straight to crime here, give you an idea of what's going on.
Yep.
So the Country Liberal Party, not only do they oppose the calls to actually increase the age of criminal responsibility, but they want to lower it.
Oh my god, they want to put them, these diaper-bound little Aboriginal angels, they want to put them in jail. Oh god. No, not like, the fucking 14-year-old that, has torched about an entire fucking car dealership's worth of cars.
Right. So look, they actually want it to go back to 10. At the moment, it's at 12. Now, how on earth it ever got to that in the first place is just beyond me. I mean, I've said before that, like, yes, it is true that here in Australia, having so many jurisdictions with a criminal responsibility age of 10 is, that we're an outlier. We're special in that regard, right? But we're dealing with very special circumstances, and that is we have the lowest IQ and the highest crime committing race in the world who live here.
Yep.
Mean that they are the most incarcerated race of people in the world. And you know that Body Count band by that has Ice-T in it. Mike
Uh,
Enoch likes actually. They had
of course
a
you
controversial song called "Cop Killer," but on their first album, I think it was their first album anyway. There's one song where at the beginning of it, Ice-T says there are more black people in jail than there are in college. Now,
do. Yes.
like people have gone and fact checked on that. It might have been true at the time, but it's not true anymore, thanks to affirmative action and things like that. However, in Australia, if you're talking about Aborigines being blacks, it's absolutely true. There are more Aboriginal people in jail and in youth detention than there are in university. So
Thank God.
we do have a unique situation here. It's not like in, say, a country like, I don't know, Norway or something, where, I don't know, well, I'm not sure what their age of criminal responsibility is, but I can absolutely bet it wouldn't be 10. It's probably like 16 or something. And that, like, even though I would probably disagree with it, that's manageable for them. It's becoming unmanageable because they keep importing Africans and stuff, though. It's changing. But for a
15 years
while,
in
anyway,
Norway, Sweden, Finland.
yeah, in like Nordic countries like that, while they were still Nordic anyway, you could actually run a criminal justice system that operated on a very light touch, lenient sentences, high ages of criminal responsibility, etc. Like even people who've been found guilty of murder in Finland, for example, it's almost like they live in a hotel, you know. But the thing is, though, their murderers tend not to reoffend when they get out. So even if you don't like the idea of a murderer, like, living like that, still, it's not contributing to high crime rates. So those systems can work for countries like that. Can't work here when we're full of Aborigines. We just can't do it. So yeah, I'm glad that is a CLP policy. Uh, whether or not that eventuates, it's going to remain to be seen. I mean, look, Leah Finocchiaro did say that the very first meeting she would do, which is today, the Sunday after the election, would actually be with the police commissioner to discuss getting crime under control in the Northern Territory. Well, do I need to remind people who the police commissioner is in the Northern Territory? His name is Michael Murphy, and this is the guy who spoke at the Garma Festival to issue a formal apology from Northern Territory police to Northern Territory Aborigines, effectively saying, we're sorry for policing you and putting you in jail and things like that. You know what? If the Northern Territory police didn't exist out in those remote areas, like if they only existed in Darwin, they'd pretty much all be dead by now.
Yep.
If they actually wanted to impose real harm on them, all they would have to do is just go, all right, police yourselves, and then your rival gangs who name themselves after John Bon Jovi and metal bands, I'm not kidding, you guys can go and fight it out with all your hatchets and your axes and whatever else, and we'll just see who wins. It would be a fucking bloodbath, and it would be a self-ethnic cleansing. That's what would happen.
And it would be based.
So, I'm sorry, but when you've got such a cuck police commissioner, I mean, look, Leah Finocchiaro, if you really want to be a tough on crime chief minister, you'd do? You wouldn't just meet the police commissioner. You'd sack him. Have a hardliner put in place, the kind that the police union would actually get behind, and then have a meeting with him. That would send the best signal to Territorians. And by the way, on the Aboriginal voice, Leah Finocchiaro, for a while, the CLP's official stand was neutral. They just weren't getting involved in it at all. As it got closer and closer to referendum day, however, she said, well, I'm going to be voting no. So, I
Yeah.
mean, it's a shame that, she had to just always have her eye on the polls to see how trends were going. I mean, why couldn't she have just said that from the beginning? Or better yet, actually make it official policy that the CLP opposes the voice. But eventually, once she saw the writing on the wall, she's like, oh, okay, yeah, well, I'm going to be voting no, and I'm going to tell you about it. But still, the
What a
CLP
pussy.
didn't get involved. Like, when it came to official campaigning for the no side, the CLP still did not get involved at all, which is a shame. Okay, so what else? All right, I mentioned this before. This was the plan to implement Declan's law. So
Oh no.
there's a range of legislative changes that would happen there. But the main thrust of it is that a larger cohort of offenders would start with a position of no bail. So that means that, like, even if you're a first offender, you would still end up in remand rather than out on bail. And as I said, that Declan guy who was killed, it was someone who was out on bail. Now, this was opposed by, I think it was like Criminal Lawyers of Northern Territory, I think they were called. And they said that the reason they oppose it is because it would really only have one effect, and that is that it would simply put first-time offenders, or more of them, in remand. I'm like, well, yeah, that's the whole point, isn't it? Like, okay, only one effect, but that's a good effect. Because a lot of these first-time offenders, that isn't the only way you should think about them. We're talking about, yeah, all right, it's their first offense, but it's a very serious offense. So, the type of people who would have to
He
go
murder
out on
raped
bail,
someone, but he murder
yeah,
raped
it's
someone, but it
not,
was his first offense,
these are
Kev.
not people who are just doing, shoplifting or whatever. Yeah, we are talking about things like sexual assault and sometimes even murder and manslaughter. And then they go out on bail and they go and commit the same crimes again. Or they stab to death some poor kid working in Dad Murphy's, as happened here.
Yep.
A return to spit hoods. Now, spit hoods, these are
Put
the
him
things.
back in
It's
chains.
basically,
Back in chains.
look, no, but all a spit hood is just like a perforated mask that you put over someone's face. And you know why? Because they
They're
spit at
disgusting little animals.
custodial, and if they can, they even try to bite them. Okay, because when you've got them restrained by the arms and legs, they've really only got their mouth left as a weapon, and some of them will use it. And the one whose photo leaked to the media somehow was what was his name? Dylan Voller. Remember Dylan
Dylan,
Voller?
yes.
He
The
was
one
like the
white one they
only,
found.
yeah, he was like the only white boy in Northern Territory juvenile detention. And I mean that. He was literally the only one. Because if you look at the stats, typically the Northern Territory juvenile detention population is 100% Indigenous. 100%. I'm not exaggerating. And Dylan Voller was in the system for a period of time where he was the only one, the only white boy there. So, yeah, he was in the spit hood. Why was he in the spit hood? Because he was spitting and biting staff, plain and simple. But yeah, then you get do-gooders like Amnesty International saying that this is a form of torture, and therefore we need to get rid of them. So that's exactly what Labor did. So CLP says they're going to bring these back. I hope they do. Okay, so both Labor and the CLP support youth camps as alternatives to youth detention, and have promised to build 2 new women's prisons in Darwin and Alice Springs. Okay, so we can see here that, the CLP still is in favour of these so-called diversionary programs, meaning, is there anything else we can do besides locking them up? Unfortunately, in a lot of cases, no, there aren't. But I guess, for people who have been committing more minor crimes,
With their heads smooth off.
yeah. I mean, I don't mind the idea of making them like work on farms in really remote parts of Australia because like there's not really many opportunities for them to commit crime there and they can't really run away because all you do is just end up in desert land if you do that. So, if they're a little bit tougher on them, that would be better.
Just whip
Okay,
them.
so
Bring out the whip and
Labor
just beat him with it.
promised to grant public housing safety officers the power to use capsicum spray and arrest unwelcome visitors in order to transport them to police. Right. So, obviously, many of these remote communities, well, most of them, no, pretty much all of them, are living in public housing. Uh, Remember, there was actually a High Court challenge that found that the right to public housing repairs was found. So, in other words, like if you lived in public housing, you had a right for it to be in a good condition, even if you were the one who trashed it. And in some cases, they literally they take wood off the roof to light a fire in the backyard. They do stuff like that. So, yeah, if you want to know one of the reasons why they're going broke, I forgot to mention the Northern Territory's net debt is almost $11 billion. In Tasmania, where they've got twice the population, their debt is 3.5 billion. So I'm obviously not saying that public spending on Aborigines is the only reason for this, but it's certainly a big part of it. So anyway, yeah. So I mean that I guess is kind of extraordinary. Public housing safety officers get given capsicum spray and are able to arrest unwelcome visitors.
I love unwelcome visitors. We all know that some drunk Aboriginal rolling around at fucking 3 p.m. because they started drinking at 10.
Yeah. And and then they need to, as they put it here, transport them to police. Right. I mean, remember that guy who ended up being shot by Zachary Rolfe? He chased away two cops with an axe.
Yep.
All right. And the police just had to retreat with that one. So yeah, I mean, they need these powers, and they need to not be afraid of having the power to restrain them, and yes, even fire on them if their life is put at risk. So the CLP plans to take youth justice out of Territory families and put it back into the corrections portfolio. What they're saying there is they want to start treating crime actually like a crime issue and not a social issue, as the ABC would put it. Now here's actually a policy I'm quite a fan of. So talking about that Aboriginal independent, Yingyagula, so he was the member for Mulka, which is in northeast Arnhem Land. He said he wants more Aboriginal offenders returned to their country, their regional area where they come from, and to be disciplined by elders. So this is sometimes, known as elder law. Yeah, I'm all for it because you know why? It's about physical punishment. It's stuff like being speared in the leg. This is how Aborigines actually dealt, to the extent that they did deal with crime. This is how they dealt with it. When someone got out of line, you physically punished them. And it served as a good deterrent. As we know, locking up
Blow their heads smooth off.
It doesn't really provide all that much of a deterrent. I'm not saying don't do it, because part of the reason why we lock people up is to incapacitate them. In other words, make it impossible for them to commit more crimes. But yeah, in terms of actual deterrence, yeah, I don't think it actually does that much. But a good flogging, I think that would. When you bring immediate pain and suffering to someone, That's the stuff that they think twice about.
Sometimes that's the only thing that they understand. You need to speak their language. And I'm not talking about grunts and gravels over a long distance, kind of awkwardly and annoyingly across a parking lot. I'm talking bringing back the cane.
Yeah, but look, no, not in public schools, not in white schools.
Oh, no.
I don't know if I agree with
You don't
cane.
need that, really.
Yeah, but look, I'm still not. I'm not even talking about schools. I'm just talking about police, and like the powers that the state have to enforce the law. I don't want teachers like taking that up, but
Mm.
police and judges, yeah. I mean, I don't have a problem with them meting out physical punishment for people, particularly if it
We
works.
need to send Aboriginal criminals to the penis exploding machine.
Hmm.
Got you right
Okay,
in the middle of a sip.
I am trying to squeeze them in. Okay, let's go to some of the other issues. We won't go too far in depth with these, but we'll try to go through all of them. So, cost of living, obviously. Um, so, the Northern Territory, just like anywhere else in this country, has seen higher prices for just about everything. I don't know if they compare inflation wise, but still, they're up there. And that includes things like higher house prices and rent prices and all of that. So the CLP has promised a freeze on car registration fees for 12 months, as well as driver's license. Free driver's licenses for a year. Okay. The battery bonus. They want to raise that to $12,000. This is for like green energy in your house. Um, so they want to
Mm.
double the solar feed-in tariff at peak times. Oh God, to encourage renewables. Okay, so unfortunately, they're not. You know, they're still in on the net zero by 2050 and all that crap. Unfortunately, and by the way, don't also think that Leah Finocchiaro is some social conservative. She may come from a Catholic Italian background, but she voted in favour for the RU486 drug, which is the abortion drug. Um, it's like the morning after pill that you can take months after and kill the fetus. So,
Lovely.
even though, at face value anyway, I definitely prefer the CLP's policies, particularly on crime. I'm still skeptical as to how much of a better job, if at all, they would do than Labor. Um, what else? Um, So, yeah, last time Labor had $41 million dollars to contain electricity prices and inflation, um, and also promised to spend $60 million dollars on underground power lines in Darwin's northern suburbs. They have a big problem with infrastructure because, like, every town is just so, like, far apart from others. Like, I was reading that a flight from Darwin to one of the regional towns in the Northern Territory cost $946.
Yep.
So
Because it'll be
yeah,
charter.
yeah. So that gives you an idea of just how far away like your neighbours and everything are when you live there. Okay, and Labor's also pledged to provide free land to a third-party supermarket chain and streamline its approval. And so that's in a bid to attract an alternative to Coles and Woolworths in the territory. Yeah.
Uh,
So if you think the Coles Woolies duopoly is a problem where you live, well, yeah, it's just they just run the whole show in the territory, basically. Okay, so housing. The home buyers grant, first home buyers grant, both sides of politics supported that. The CLP first pledge grants of $50,000 for first home builders and $10,000 for first home buyers. So, yeah, I mean, obviously it's more expensive to build a house than to buy an existing one. But yeah, that's pretty generous. Now, Labor went and matched that. In fact, they beat it for first home builders. They put that to 60,000, but they kept the current 10,000 for simply buying your first home. Oh, and the Libs were also offering $30,000 for people who move from interstate to build a new home, regardless of whether they've previously owned property. That's an interesting one. Okay. Business and industry, the CLP promised to raise the payroll tax-free threshold from $1.5 million to $2.5 million. They say that would save more than 1,300 businesses up to $55,000 each. But it would leave a $40 million gap in the government's coffers. So, yeah. I would still rather payroll tax just be abolished completely. I just think it's a retarded tax. And put tariffs back up if you want to make up for that shortfall. So they also want approval times for various projects to be cut by around 50%. Oh, God, they always say stuff like that, but they're not very good at implementing it. And Labor wanted to boost Aboriginal employment in remote communities and pledged to push the federal government to reform the Community Development Program, the CDP. That effectively is a work for the dole program for Aborigines only. So it's like, if you do that, you get a little bit more dole money, and you do just like pointless busy work, like maybe planting trees in an area where they'll never sprout. Okay. Climate. Oh, sorry, missed one. Health. So, the Labor government allocated $100 million for upgrades to Royal Darwin Hospital and $2 million towards planning for a new aged care centre. However, the overall health budget then was cut. Part of the desperate attempts to rein in the debt, I guess. So the CLP wanted to resurrect a controversial mandatory drug and alcohol rehabilitation policy. That was first introduced in 2013, but it was later scrapped as it was found to have no apparent long-term health impacts.
What, because they just go back to smash and fucking piss again? Like immediately?
Yeah, pretty
They have
much.
no agency? Yeah.
That again would be one of those things where I imagine it would probably work for like white alcoholics, but it wouldn't work for Aborigines. It's one of those cases where maybe the CLP, saw data about, compulsory rehab programs in white areas, saw good results and said, hey, why don't we try it? Well, you're trying it on a different population. It doesn't mean it's going to work, okay? In fact, it means it probably won't.
And how much of this is completely and utterly symbolic? Like I don't believe that anyone doesn't know that fucking Aboriginals have problems with their own agency. I don't believe that anyone at least doesn't at least grasp that. How much is just like this is just like, oh well, if we put this into policy, like we can look like we've done something.
Yeah, right. Okay, so both parties committed to $20 million for the healthcare centre in Borroloola. Oh, that was the regional area I was talking about. So if you get a flight from Darwin to Borroloola, $946 one way. Bloody expensive. Labor also said that they were going to present a bill on voluntary assisted dying. They're one of the few jurisdictions now that don't have it. The CLP is neutral on that, so we'll wait and see if they release anything on it. Tourism, $3 million to support a military tourism. So that is one of the CLP's flagship policies to support the industry. Well, I guess, yeah, you could talk about the bombing of Darwin and stuff like that. I guess that would be a interesting history tour to do of sorts if you're going to visit the Northern Territory.
Yeah, I guess. And also, why? Why are you there? Why are you doing this to yourself?
You know, WA was bombed as well by the Japanese.
Yeah.
Something that doesn't get talked about. But yeah, when they bombed Darwin, they actually bombed the Northwest as well. Yeah, some of our towns got hit. So Labor's committing or wanted to commit $16 million towards its aviation attraction scheme. Yeah, I've heard of that as well. Don't know much about it. Okay, climate and environment. So they both want to grow the territory's gas industry. So that will include onshore fracking in the Beetaloo Basin. Now, it was that policy in particular that was said to have upset some Labor voters who would then go on to vote Greens. That's the way the ABC put it, though. I don't know about that. Let's wait and see if that seat of Fanny Bay is actually won by the Greens in the end. Okay, so it was official policy from Labor when they were in government to reach net zero by 2050. And unfortunately, the CLP did some Me Tooism there. They said they're going to retain that target as well. So that's bipartisan, unfortunately.
Oh, no.
They also are bipartisan on the practice of gillnet fishing, and they want to phase that out over the next 4 years. Do you know what that is, Nolsey?
No, I don't know what the fuck that is.
I just assume like it's where they use like a massive net and you end up actually capturing the wrong fish when you're doing it, but it's like a time saving measure, because I know they have like that thing called deep sea bottom trawling, if you've heard of that, and that's effectively again where they just like they trawl a massive net in the deep sea and you just capture everything that it scoops up, and then you sort through the loot once it's done. And the reason environmentalists hate that is because you don't just get the fish that you're trying to catch, you get a myriad of other marine life and plants in the mix as well. So,
yeah, I'm just looking at gillnet right here. It's basically it's a trap more than fishing, really, and it's just basically like a net that like comes down to a point and suffocates fish to death. Because backwards, yeah, they're using like rivers and flowing bodies of water, and they're a killing trap, and yeah, they don't fucking anything that fits in the front of it can get in it. So
right. Okay, and finally on the environment, both parties were set to commit $12 million to the Aboriginal Ranger program. So you notice everything I read here on the environment, the parties are pretty much identical. And, usually climate and energy is the one issue where the coalition, the Libs or the Nats, actually distinguish themselves a bit from Labor. Not here in the Northern Territory, unfortunately.
Yeah, apparently not.
No. Okay, so on Aboriginal affairs, obviously that's going to be an issue. Labor promised a treaty 6 years ago. So yeah, they were one of the first. One of the first like governments actually in power to say that they promoted that. They also set aside $300,000 to support truth telling activities. Labor did say that they were going to revive treaty talks if they were re-elected. Okay, now this actually seems like an area where there's a genuine difference between the two parties, because the CLP actually formally opposed the treaty, but they only did so after the voice was defeated. And this has happened on numerous levels. The same thing happened in Queensland. Remember, Peter Dutton even said that he supported a second referendum on the voice? And then when the yes vote was completely blown the fuck out, he's like, oh, actually, no, I don't support that anymore. It's just like it's frustrating to the extent to which the Liberals support this stuff only because of how resounding a win the no vote got in the referendum. It's like, why couldn't they have just taken these positions independently? They just always have to keep their eyes on the polls and how what the public thinks. Oh god! And so, if you're interested in what the Greens support here, they support a treaty and another $250 million. $250 million towards truth telling. Remember how much
Oh
Labor
God.
said they put aside for it? $300,000. The Greens want $250 million.
Why
Jesus,
is the fuck Whitey session so expensive?
that is like fucking 25% of a territory budget. That is enormous. Okay, domestic violence. Let's see if I got my figures right here. Oh no, I was a little off. So both parties committed to $180 million over 5 years to combat domestic violence. Look, doesn't matter how much fucking money you throw at this. You need to enforce dry areas. You need to have um, a strong law and order presence, and you can't just be punishing them with a slap on the wrist. You've got to actually, make them genuinely afraid to bash your wife or whoever. Because right now they're not afraid.
Yeah, they really don't give a shit.
And also, it's worth pointing out here that there was an inquiry, it might have even been a royal commission into domestic violence in the Northern Territory 2 years ago, and they made a request for that funding. So it took Labor a long time to do it, and right on the eve of an election. Okay, finally on arts and recreation. So Labor promised a $10 million package for Palmerston if re-elected, which would fund lighting upgrades across the city. And by the way, that's a security measure as well. That's not
Yeah,
just like to make the place pretty. That's also for security.
that's to stop people getting robbed and raped. People.
Yeah. A new cafe at the Swell Pool, playgrounds, bike paths, and street art. They also promised $2 million for an annual grant program to upgrade sports and recreations facilities. The CLP pledged $5 million for a multicultural centre in Alice Springs. Oh my God. $1 million on improving existing multicultural facilities in the territory. Both parties have gone big on recreational fishing promises. So the CLP wanted to trial a barramundi stocking program in Darwin Harbour, spent $500,000 on upgrading the Kurraberry and East Arm boat ramps. Labor would build $2 million for the artificial reef in Darwin and spend almost $1 million on improving accessibility at boat ramps. Hunting reserves would be expanded by the CLP, and a $50,000 grant program would be open to hunting groups. Okay, so I guess maybe this is an area where the CLP is marginally better. But look, notice most of what I have read through here. We went through 12 policy areas. It looks as though the CLP distinguished themselves a little bit on crime. Hold on, I just realized I missed two. Let me go through those quickly. Let's see. This one, okay, there should be some difference here. This is police,
Children,
obviously related to
police.
crime.
Oh
So
yeah.
Labor pledged an extra $570 million for police over the next 5 years. And they said that that would deliver an extra 200 police officers, 70 support staff, and 25 triple O call takers. Okay, I can maybe believe you when you talk about the support staff and the triple O call takers. However, the 200 police officers, where are you going to get them? Just because you open
Mm.
those positions and make the resources available does not mean you're going to get people willing to actually put up their hand and say, yeah, I want to take a job out in these bumfuck nowhere areas where Aborigines chase you with axes. How are you going to get them to go there? And not only that, but
Looks like
police are
someone's addressing
afraid.
that problem. Not Labor though.
Police are afraid to actually take their weapons out over there because the media will just absolutely ruin their lives if it comes down to a situation where they have to shoot someone in self-defense. So yeah, I mean, and good luck to the CLP with that one as well. Uh, you're going to have a hell of a time actually attracting police officers in the first place. Now, the CLP had not outlined how much money they would pour into the police force, but they did just they were attacking Labor all the time for neglecting funding and neglecting the attrition rate, how much people are quitting the police force, and how little people are taking on the job. They did, however, say that they want to grant police extra powers to fine and to charge and arrest people for drinking in public areas where it is not allowed. Now, that is common sense policy there, okay? And that is not something where you're just simply throwing money at the problem. You're actually saying, no, we're going to give the police more powers to do this. And that's what they need. They need to not be afraid of actually doing their job.
They need to bring down the whip on these unruly individuals.
Right. Okay, now the CLP also pledged to trial a police retention scheme. And that would mean if you hung around long enough, you would receive a bonus of up to $20,000 a year.
I think they're still probably actually going to have to go higher, man.
Yeah. This is obviously an example of throwing money at the problem. In this case, it's directly appealing to the hip pocket, though, because it's like, look, we will give you more money, not just more resourcing, but you personally will get more money if you take on this job and stick around. But yeah, how much did you say nurses were getting paid in some of those areas?
There was a position open for $300K.
$300,000.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if a 20 grand bonus is enough to cut it for some of those cops. They'd want to actually really, really bump that number up to something more significant for it to actually be appealing. Okay, now this is actually the final issue, children and education. So Labor promised to double the number of free preschool hours at 25 primary schools across the territory. That would come with a $35 million price tag if they were to roll that out over 4 years. So the CLP did not match that commitment, but they said that they would make swimming lessons free for all primary school kids. It also promised $15 million for a multi-sports precinct at Alice Springs. The CLP also wants to improve school attendance by holding parents accountable through compulsory case conferences, fines, and in extreme cases, prosecution, and refer caregivers to the Commonwealth Income Management. All right, so again, as you can imagine, they've got a huge problem with Aboriginal kids attending school. And the reason they don't attend school is because, well, the parents aren't making them go. So, of course, they're just going to hang around. So, yeah, the CLP
the parents
actually
are
wants
still
to
sleeping off their hangover to take you to school. Little Gordon, I guess.
All right. Now we can do the overall summary here. So, specifically on the issues of policing and crime, we can see, at least on paper, some marked differences between the Country Liberal Party and Territory Labor. Look, everything else I went through there, like housing, like health, even the climate and energy, we just saw a whole heap of Me Tooism. The differences on Aboriginal affairs, the CLP only really started to distinguish themselves from Labor in that regard after the No referendum won. Only when they saw just how unpopular all this Indigenous rights campaigning is. It's not popular. It's just a vocal minority of people who push it all the time. And that was absolutely demonstrated with the resounding no vote. But I guess it's better than nothing for them to take that up. So that means at the least we're not going to get a treaty. We may still get more funding for the bloody truth-telling stuff, which is basically just a way of them getting up shaming the white man by making up stories, of abuse, and stolen generations that were never stolen. That's really all it is. So, yeah. Nolsey, you want to make any predictions in terms of crime and policing for the next 4 years for the Territory? What do you think?
I think it's going to get a lot worse. A lot worse, unless they're actually serious about half of these fucking policies. I think it's going to get worse.
I mean, look, a lot of what they've proposed here basically is not harsh enough.
Yeah.
So, look, I mean, bringing the age of criminal responsibility back down to 10, that will make a difference. But yeah, I mean, again, it will just mean you're locking more of these kids up. That's better than nothing, right? Because you stop them from actually going out committing crimes. But yeah, you're still dealing with a 30.8% Aboriginal population. You're dealing with much of that crime being centered in highly regional, separated areas where they find it very hard to actually put police into in the first place. We're still dealing with the fact that there's no cashless welfare card. The CLP, that's not their remit. They can't quarantine dole payments. That's a completely
Fucking
an
should
issue
be.
for the federal government. And yeah, we still have the destructive influence of social media as well, where, you know, believe it or not, Aborigines do use social media, and they use it as a weapon in committing crime, getting other people involved in their crimes.
Yep.
So yeah,
Covered it before. Challenge videos. I stole and burnt down 3 cars. Can you do 4?
Now, there's been no talk here, not that I've seen in the hour and 20 minutes we've been doing this show, or any of the articles that I read before, on actually making tougher sentences. You know, they were just sort of like tinkering around the edges. Things like criminal responsibility, making bail laws harsher, things like that, and more police. Okay, but what about, say, you know, if you're out there guilty of carjacking or whatever, actually increasing the sentence, like the prison time for carjacking? I have not really seen any changes like that in the CLP's platform. I really haven't seen any. So, yeah, I'm not too optimistic, I got to say. They really have to go all in on this, or it's not worth it. They need to not only implement the policies that they have announced, but they need to go much harder, much harder, if you want to see stuff really turn around. If you want to see businesses return to areas like Alice Springs and not be run out by marauding blackfellas, you're going to have to go really hard on all of this. All right. I think we can leave it there. So thanks everyone for tuning into this just short episode on the Northern Territory election. I believe the next one we've got coming up will be in October. That'll be for Queensland. So we'll give you an episode then as well, of course. And the Roses War should be back with you Tuesday night or Wednesday morning.
Yeah.
One of the two. We'll probably record on Tuesday. So yeah, listen out for that. Okay, right. Well, thank you for listening.
No one gives a shit about the NT.
Except us. We give you almost an hour and a half of coverage. We haven't forgotten you. Okay, well, thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon.